my girlfriend left last night. We were at the Stevens bar, and I'm staying in the hotel there, and she hasn't made it back to the hotel.
Emily Lambert was a 30-year-old mother, a school teacher, a woman full of life. She loved her two little girls more than anything in the world. Her smile could light up a room. Her friends said she was kind, sweet, and always full of energy. On a Friday evening, she packed her bags for a short trip. It was just a weekend getaway with her boyfriend, Robert Early. A quiet motel. A few drinks. Nothing too wild. Just time away from the busy world. She told her family she'd be back by Monday. But she never made it home. What started as a normal night ended with police helicopters, search dogs, and a mother who had simply disappeared. Her phone stopped ringing. No texts. No signs of life. Her daughters waited by the door, but she never walked through it. The last person to see her alive was the man who said he loved her. He claimed she wandered off after an argument, that she was upset, that maybe she just needed air. But nothing he said added up. No one could find her shoes. No one could explain the marks found later in the dirt. And no one understood why Robert kept changing his story. The questions came fast, but the answers didn't. What happened between those motel walls? What did he do when the lights went off and the cameras stopped recording? This wasn't a stranger in the dark. This wasn't a random act. Emily had trusted him. She had smiled next to him hours before she went missing. That's what made it harder to believe. The town of Carlsbad had no idea what was coming. And by the time they found out, it was already too late. This is the story of Emily Lambert, a young mother who vanished after a date night, a family who refused to give up, and a man whose lies slowly crumbled until the truth was buried no more. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to Crime Stories Documentaries. We share the stories that must be heard and the ones that were almost forgotten. Click the like button, share this story, and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Because sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones we should fear the most. Emily Lambert was the kind of woman who left a mark on people, not through loud words, but through quiet strength. She was a mother before anything else. Her two little girls were her world. She would braid their hair every morning before school, pack their lunches with handwritten notes, and read them bedtime stories with voices that made them giggle. At just 30, she was already doing the job of two parents. She had been through a divorce that shook her deeply, but she never let her daughters see her break. Not once. During the week, Emily worked as a second-grade teacher in Texas. She loved her job. Her classroom was filled with drawings, charts, and paper flowers made by her students. She made each child feel special. Every birthday was celebrated. Every win, no matter how small, was clapped for. She believed in second chances, not just for her students, but for herself, too. After her divorce, Emily wasn't in a rush to fall in love again. Her heart had been hurt once, and she didn't want to risk it too soon. But loneliness crept in sometimes, especially at night when the kids were asleep. She missed adult conversation, someone to hold her hand, someone who made her feel like a woman, not just a mother. That's when Robert Early came into her life. They met through mutual friends at a small barbecue. Robert was quiet at first, polite, and seemed to listen more than he spoke. He asked her about her girls. He complimented her on how hard she worked. He didn't push. And for a while, that felt safe. Emily had been around controlling men before. Robert didn't act like them. Not in the beginning. Their relationship moved slowly at first. Text messages here and there. A few coffee dates. Eventually, they started spending weekends together. Emily's friends were happy for her. She seemed lighter, more hopeful. Her smile had returned. But over time, some of them began to notice small things, things Emily either didn't see or didn't want to talk about. Her best friend, Megan, once told her that Robert seemed jealous. He didn't like when Emily stayed out late with her girlfriends. He would message her constantly during those nights, asking where she was, who she was with, and when she'd be home. At first, Emily laughed it off. "He's just protective," she'd say. "He worries about me." Megan wasn't so sure. She had seen that kind of worry before. It wasn't love. It was control dressed as concern. Then there was the time Robert showed up unexpectedly at Emily's school during lunch. He claimed he was just bringing her favorite sandwich, but one of her co-workers overheard him questioning her about a male colleague. The teacher remembered Emily's face, how it dropped from a smile to confusion in a split second. Still, Emily brushed it off. "He's just insecure," she said. "I understand. He's been hurt before." What Emily didn't know was that Robert had a past, one that didn't always make it into conversations. He had been in trouble before, nothing serious on paper, but enough to raise concerns. An ex-girlfriend had once called the police after an argument got out of hand. The case didn't go anywhere, and Robert claimed she was just trying to ruin his name. Emily never asked for details. She believed in second chances, remember? Her family started to grow uneasy. Her father, in particular, didn't like Robert. He thought the man was too quiet, too guarded. When Emily brought him over for dinner, Robert barely spoke. He didn't ask questions about the family, didn't offer to help clean up, didn't seem to fit in. After Robert left, her dad said plainly, "There's something off about that man." Emily rolled her eyes. "You just don't want me dating anyone," she replied. No one could reach her after that. Not really. It was like Robert had slowly become the center of her world. He didn't force her to pull away from people. He didn't tell her to cut anyone off. He didn't have to. Emily started doing it on her own. Little by little. Fewer girls' nights. Shorter phone calls. Missed family dinners. She always had a reason. She always sounded okay. But her loved ones knew something had changed. Then came the weekend trip. Emily had been looking forward to it. It was going to be a break from her job. A moment to breathe. She had told her mother she'd be back Sunday night, ready to see her girls first thing Monday morning. She packed her bag. She kissed her kids. She left with Robert. It would be the last time anyone would see her alive. I need you to join the conversation. Have you ever been in love so deeply that you ignored the red flags just to hold on to the good moments? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. The drive from Emily's town to Carlsbad, New Mexico, was quiet. About 3 hours of open road, broken only by scattered gas stations and dry desert scenery. Emily and Robert had been planning the trip for weeks. She needed the break. Work had been overwhelming. Her daughters had been battling colds. Life had been nonstop. Carlsbad offered space, a chance to reset, to enjoy a weekend where she could just be Emily, not mom, not teacher, not anything else. They checked into a simple motel. The kind with outside doors, 2 floors, and buzzing hallway lights that never quite worked right. Emily smiled at the front desk clerk. She laughed when the key card didn't work the first time. Everything seemed fine. That evening, they went out for dinner. A small place not far from the motel, a local spot with cheap food and live music. The waitress remembered them clearly. Emily had ordered a margarita. Robert stuck to beer. They didn't look like a couple in crisis. They looked normal. She even left a generous tip. After dinner, they headed to a nearby bar. It was a Friday night, and the place was packed. Loud music, people dancing, and the scent of alcohol and sweat filled the air. Emily liked to dance. She always had. And that night, she danced with joy. Witnesses later told police that she seemed full of life and carefree. But Robert, he wasn't smiling. A man had offered Emily a compliment, something harmless, maybe even respectful. But Robert didn't take it well. He pulled her aside. The argument started quietly. Then voices were raised. A woman at the bar said she heard Emily telling him to calm down more than once. Another said she looked embarrassed, like she wanted to leave. The bar's bouncer had to step in. He asked them to take it outside if they were going to argue. And so they did. That's when things started to get worse. Outside, the argument grew louder. It was around 11:30 p.m. A few people across the street noticed. A local off-duty officer was nearby and walked over to check on them. He didn't see anything alarming, just a couple in the middle of a disagreement. He asked if everything was okay. Emily told him yes. Robert stayed quiet, arms crossed. The officer asked again. Emily nodded. "We're fine." she said. But everything was not fine. Surveillance footage from a store across the street caught them walking back toward the motel. Emily was walking ahead. Robert followed a few steps behind. She kept turning back, as if talking to him. Then at one point, she stopped. They stood under a flickering streetlight. Words were exchanged. Emily gestured with her hands, looking upset. He stood still. That was the last time she was seen on camera. That would be the last time anyone would see Emily Lambert alive. They returned to the motel. Witnesses in nearby rooms reported hearing muffled voices. One said she thought it was a television. Another heard what sounded like a door slamming hard. No one called for help. No one knocked to check. The next morning, Robert showed up at the front desk. He looked tired, said he'd lost his girlfriend, claimed they'd gotten into an argument, and she'd walked off sometime during the night. The clerk asked if he wanted to file a report. He said no. He said she was probably cooling off and would be back soon. But something was wrong. Very wrong. Instead of calling Emily's friends, Robert went back to the room. He didn't seem worried. He didn't seem like a man whose girlfriend was missing in an unfamiliar town. He didn't start searching the streets or knocking on doors. He didn't even check with the bar. When Emily didn't show up to pick up her daughter's Sunday night, her family knew something was terribly wrong. They called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. They called again. Nothing. That's when the search began. And when police finally caught up with Robert, his story had changed. First, he said she walked off angry. Then he said she might have gotten a ride from someone. Then he wasn't sure what direction she had gone. His answers were shaky, and the timeline didn't hold. He said she left barefoot, in the middle of the night, in a town she didn't know. No purse, no phone, no jacket. No one believed him. Police returned to the motel and pulled security footage. They watched the grainy clip again and again. Emily and Robert walking back. Emily looking over her shoulder. Robert silent. It was clear something had happened after that moment. But what? What could cause a young mother, a joyful school teacher, a woman who was dancing just hours earlier, to vanish without a trace? The desert was wide. The motel was surrounded by miles of open land. If something had happened, it could be anywhere. And time was running out. If Robert said Emily walked away that night, why didn't she take her shoes, her phone, or even her purse? Have you ever gone on a trip thinking it would bring you closer to someone, but something just fell off? Comment below if you've experienced a moment that changed everything. It was Saturday morning when Robert first told someone Emily was gone. He walked down to the front desk and said she had left the motel in the middle of the night. No explanation. No warning. He claimed they had argued and that she stormed off sometime after midnight. When the clerk asked if he wanted to call the police, Robert hesitated. He said no. He said she'd be back. But she never came back. By Sunday evening, Emily's family started to panic. She was supposed to return that afternoon to pick up her daughters. She never missed a visit. Never. Her phone was off. Her messages were unread. Her ex-husband called her again and again. Her best friend left voicemails. Everyone kept hoping she'd just show up. That maybe she needed space. That maybe she just got tired and wanted to be alone. But even as they hoped, they knew Emily would never do this. By Sunday night, they contacted police. The Carlsbad Police Department officially opened a missing persons case. An officer arrived at the motel and spoke with Robert. He repeated the same story, that Emily had walked away after their argument, that she left barefoot, with no purse or phone. He claimed he had waited, thinking she'd cool off and return. But now he wasn't sure. Police found that strange. Most people would call much sooner if their partner vanished, especially in an unfamiliar place with no way to contact them. Something felt off, but there was no proof, no blood, no signs of a struggle, just a missing woman, a boyfriend with questions, and an empty motel room. Investigators searched the room. It looked normal. Her bag was still there. Her ID was inside. Her phone charger was plugged in beside the bed. But her phone gone. They checked surveillance footage again. It confirmed what they already knew. Emily and Robert were seen walking back to the motel together around 11:45 p.m. Emily was alive. She didn't seem scared, just frustrated. That was it. After that, nothing. The motel staff said they didn't see or hear anything unusual. A woman in a nearby room said she heard a loud voice around midnight, then a door slam. Another man claimed he saw Robert outside smoking a cigarette around 1 a.m. alone. No one saw Emily after that. Police asked Robert again what happened. His story didn't change at first. He said she walked off. He had no idea where she went. She didn't say anything. She just left. When asked why he didn't go after her, he shrugged. He said Emily could handle herself. But her family knew better. She was in a strange town, late at night, with no car, no phone, no shoes. That didn't make sense. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't the type to wander off and leave her kids waiting. Something was wrong. Emily's loved ones drove to Carlsbad. They walked through nearby fields, yelled her name, showed her picture to gas stations and stores. Her brother posted flyers. Her best friend called local news stations. Her father stood outside the motel, scanning the horizon, hoping to see her walking back. He said, "She's out there. I can feel it. We just need to find her." Volunteers joined the search. Local residents stepped in. People who had never met her gave up their afternoons to comb the desert. They looked in culverts, behind dumpsters, along the side of the highway. Police used dogs. Drones flew overhead. Nothing. Emily was gone. The more time passed, the more police began to question Robert's story. His timeline didn't hold. The details felt too clean. He didn't seem angry. He didn't seem heartbroken. He just waited. That week, detectives brought him in again. This time, they pushed harder. They asked the same questions. Where did she go? Why didn't you follow her? Why did you wait so long to call for help? Robert gave the same answers. But then he paused. He looked down. And finally, for the first time, he changed his story. He said something happened that night. Something he hadn't told them. He said it was an accident. But the truth was far more disturbing. I want to hear from you again. Have you ever had a gut feeling that someone wasn't telling the full truth? Share your thoughts below. The more investigators pressed Robert, the more the cracks in his story began to show. At first, he was calm. Repeating the same version again and again, they argued. She walked away. He stayed behind. But as detectives looked closer, the story didn't line up. And they had proof. They pulled his phone records. What they found didn't match the timeline he gave them. Robert claimed he went to bed alone around 1 a.m., that his phone stayed in the room, untouched, until morning. But the data said otherwise. His phone had pinged off a cell tower almost 5 miles away at 3:17 a.m. Then again, near a remote oil field shortly after. Police looked at him differently now. Why would he lie? What was he doing miles away from the motel in the dead of night, when Emily was supposedly missing? When asked, Robert looked confused. Then he shrugged. He said maybe he went for a drive. He couldn't remember exactly. It had been a stressful night. He didn't know what time it was. But detectives weren't buying it anymore. They traced his car using security footage from nearby gas stations. They spotted his vehicle leaving the motel parking lot around 2:45 a.m. It returned just after 4 o'clock. In total, a little over an hour missing. An hour he never mentioned. An hour he tried to erase. And then came the tire tracks. A local rancher had heard about Emily's disappearance on the news. He called in after remembering something strange. He said a car had driven off-road through his property that weekend. That wasn't common out there. He followed the trail the next morning and found deep impressions, as if someone had stopped and turned around. It had rained lightly that night. The ground had held the prints. Police went out to the site. They examined the tracks. The size, the pattern, it all matched Robert's vehicle. They also found something else. A faint, partial footprint. Barefoot. Small. Just one. No one said a word, but the investigators knew what that meant. Back at the motel, detectives reviewed the surveillance footage again. Frame by frame. They noticed a gap. A section of video missing from the early morning hours. The motel system wasn't perfect. Sometimes it recorded over itself. But this felt too convenient. From 2:38 a.m. to 3:51 a.m., there was nothing. Exactly the window when Robert's car was gone. Still, police didn't have enough to arrest him. Emily's body hadn't been found. No weapon, no direct witness. Just data, suspicion, and a man who was no longer acting like a worried boyfriend. Emily's family refused to stay quiet. Her father spoke at a press conference, holding up a framed photo of her and the girls. He begged for answers. He asked anyone who had seen anything at all, to come forward. He said, "My daughter is a good woman. She's kind. She's a mother. She wouldn't just disappear." The emotion in his voice broke through. More people joined the search. More tips came in. Police kept pushing. And slowly, Robert began to retreat. He stopped taking calls. He stopped giving interviews. He stayed mostly inside his home, away from cameras, away from the family, away from the town that now looked at him with suspicion. Then, 2 days later, a deputy made a discovery. Less than 5 miles from the rancher's property, in a shallow area between brush and sand, something caught the light. It was a piece of fabric, bright, torn. Next to it, a woman's earring. The search team moved in immediately. The pressure on Robert was suffocating. He had been called in for questioning again, after the discovery of the fabric and the earring. The investigators knew they were getting close. His story was unraveling, and the holes were too big to ignore. But even with all the evidence stacked against him, Robert remained calm, almost too calm. Then, in the cold, sterile interrogation room, with the detectives staring at him, something cracked. It wasn't an outburst or a moment of rage. It was quieter than that. It was a whisper, barely audible, as if he was talking to himself more than anyone else. "I didn't mean to, it just happened." Those words shattered the air. The detectives leaned in, not saying a word. They waited. They knew he was about to break. And then he did. Robert began to tell them what really happened that night. The argument. The fight that escalated. How Emily had been frustrated, angry at him. He said she had started yelling, calling him names. That she was walking away and wouldn't listen. He told them he had grabbed an air pump. One of those old-fashioned hand pumps. He said it was instinct, that he just lost control. He hit her. Once. Then again. He described how Emily had fallen to the ground, the blood staining her clothes. But she wasn't dead. Not yet. She tried to scream. She tried to crawl. He couldn't remember much after that. He said he didn't mean for it to go that far. That it was a moment of rage, and he didn't know what he was doing. Robert said he left her there, in the field, alone. Her body still warm, but unmoving. He took a moment to pause, his breath heavy. The room felt suffocating. "I thought she would just be gone by the time I came back. I thought she was already dead. But she wasn't. Emily was still alive when he left her." Robert claimed he returned later, in the early morning hours, to check on her. But by then, it was too late. He said he knew he had to cover it up. So, he drove her body to a remote area, far away from Carlsbad, deep into the desert, where no one would find her. He buried her under some rocks. He said he didn't care. He wanted to get away with it. By the time Robert finished his confession, the room felt suffocating. The detectives, their faces frozen in disbelief, stared at him. But it wasn't shock on his face anymore. It was relief. A strange, sick relief. When the news broke, Emily's family couldn't process what they were hearing. Her father's voice cracked when he spoke to the press, each word cutting through the silence like a blade. "We trusted him. We let her go with him. And now she's gone. She didn't deserve this." The community was shaken to its core. The man they had all welcomed with open arms, the man who had seemed so kind, so patient, was a monster in disguise. The horror of the murder and the betrayal of it all echoed through the people who knew Emily. Her daughters, so young and innocent, would never understand why their mother had to die. The heartbreak, the sense of being utterly and completely lost, was something no one could fathom. Robert's confession sent ripples of disbelief through the town. How could someone they had trusted do this? How could someone so close to her family turn into a killer? It was a betrayal too deep to even comprehend. Her best friend sat in front of the cameras, eyes filled with tears. She was my best friend. She was a mother. She loved her kids more than anything. Why did he do this? Why? People who knew Robert, people who had shared meals with him, who had laughed with him, they were all left in shock. The man they knew wasn't the man they saw in the interrogation room. But even as Robert's confession brought some answers, it didn't bring closure. Not for her family. Not for the people who loved her. The question remained, why? What drove him to that point? What could have been so terrible, so unforgivable, that he would take her life? Emily Lambert's story didn't end with justice. It didn't end with Robert behind bars. It ended with heartbreak and the haunting reminder that sometimes the ones you trust the most are the ones who can hurt you the deepest. It was a discovery that no one wanted, but everyone had feared. Emily's body was finally found, deep in the desolate wilderness, miles from Carlsbad. Covered under rocks, buried in the harsh, unforgiving terrain, it was almost as if the land itself wanted to erase what had happened. But even the desert couldn't hide the truth forever. Her family, devastated, finally had closure, but it was the kind of closure that brought no comfort, only pain. They held a private funeral. It was a day that no one wanted to face, but they did. They had no choice. Emily's children, still too young to fully understand the horror of what had happened, clung to her family members for support. They were too young to grasp why their mother wouldn't be there for their birthdays, for graduations, or for the everyday moments that make childhood precious. Her father, his face a mask of grief, stood by the casket, holding back tears as the preacher spoke. Emily's mother could barely lift her head. The weight of the loss was too much. It was a loss of a daughter, a mother, a best friend. The community of Carlsbad, which had once welcomed Robert into their midst, mourned for Emily in their own way. There were candles lit in her honor, silent vigils in the church, and flowers left outside the places she loved. Her story had touched everyone. Her life, full of promise and love, was now reduced to a tragedy. A life lost at the hands of the very man she had trusted. Robert Early's arrest was a moment that should have brought relief, but it only brought more sorrow. The man who had once been seen as a loving boyfriend, someone who seemed genuine, now stood as a murderer. His confession had shattered everything: the family, the community, the memories they all had of him. When the news broke that Robert had been formally arrested and charged with first-degree murder, the reaction was swift and filled with outrage. Her best friend, unable to hold back tears, said, "We let him into our lives. We gave him a place at our table, in our hearts. And now she's gone. All because of him." But Robert's arrest was only the beginning of the nightmare. The trial that followed became a public spectacle. The details of Emily's death, the cruel nature of her murder, the lies and the betrayal, it all played out in front of a shocked public. The courtroom was packed for every session. Cameras captured Robert's every move, and the air was thick with tension as the prosecution laid out its case. Emily's family, despite their grief, remained strong. They had to. They had to be there for her. They had to see that justice was done. And justice came swiftly. Robert Early was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict, when it was read aloud in the courtroom, felt like a small victory, but it didn't bring back Emily. It didn't heal the wounds. It didn't undo the betrayal. Robert's sentencing brought some closure, but it left a scar. Emily's life had been taken in such a brutal, senseless way that it left everyone who knew her wondering, why? Her children, though they were young, would grow up with the knowledge that their mother was taken from them by the man they had once accepted into their lives. They would always carry that grief. They would always have that hole in their hearts. But Emily's legacy lived on in the memories of those who loved her, in her children's laughter, in the stories they would one day tell about their brave and beautiful mother, and in the justice that, though imperfect, at least gave her the dignity of a voice. even if it was only in death. The story of Emily Lambert doesn't end with Robert's conviction. In fact, her death opened up a much larger conversation, one that reaches beyond her family, beyond Carlsbad, and touches the hearts of people everywhere. Emily's case wasn't just about a murder. It was about a relationship that, from the outside, seemed perfectly fine. It was about the red flags that people missed, the signs of emotional and psychological abuse that often go unnoticed. Many who knew Robert didn't see the warning signs. He was charming, confident, and loving at first. But behind closed doors, things were different. Domestic violence isn't always physical. Emotional abuse, manipulation, and control can often leave no visible scars, but they can break a person just as much. Emily had no bruises, no cuts. But inside, the damage was done long before that fateful night. Robert's control, his subtle intimidation, the way he isolated her, all of that, in combination with his emotional cruelty, led to her tragic end. Domestic violence experts, advocates, and survivors have all echoed the same message. Recognize the signs before it's too late. The signs aren't always obvious, but they're there. Control over finances, jealousy, isolation from family and friends, constant belittling. These are all red flags. And Emily's story is a painful reminder of what can happen when those signs are ignored or misunderstood. Advocates for justice, like those working in domestic violence awareness programs, spoke passionately about the need for better education and resources for victims. They urge people to speak up, to reach out when they see something wrong. Domestic violence isn't just a private issue, it's a community issue, one that requires action from everyone. As a teacher, Emily was a beacon of light to her students. She wasn't just teaching them math or science. She was teaching them how to be kind, how to be compassionate, how to believe in themselves. Her students remember her as a teacher who always went the extra mile, someone who made learning fun, who listened, and who cared. The impact she had on them can never be erased. They carry a piece of her with them every day. Emily didn't deserve this. No one does. As we say goodbye to Emily today, let us remember the woman she was. Let us remember the lessons she taught us to be kind, to be loving, and to never turn a blind eye to the suffering of others. We encourage you to share Emily's story. Share it with your friends, your family, and anyone who needs to hear it. The more we talk about domestic violence, the more we can help those who are suffering in silence. Reach out. Speak up. Help raise awareness. There are many others just like Emily who are still out there, still struggling. Your voice could save a life. Subscribe to Crime Stories Documentaries for more real-life cases that deserve to be told. See you in my next video.